This file is classified. Its content relates to unreal events, psychological trauma, and unknown phenomena. By continuing, you assume responsibility. Some places are never forgotten on the dusty shelves of the past. Ashcroft. It's not just a building, it's an echo chamber. The moment I stepped inside, a strange unease stirred within me. While my body shivered in Maine's November chill, my mind felt as if it had been left there years ago. In 2013, it all began with a call on the police radio. They said a few teenagers went missing in the Ashcroft building, but I sensed it was something much deeper. This wasn't a missing persons case. It was a calling, as if Ashcroft wanted me back. People think places like this are abandoned, but some structures are never truly empty, and some silences speak louder than screams. When I reached the door, I felt a weight inside me that I couldn't explain. This wasn't just a physical place. It was like a graveyard where memories were imprisoned. A word etched into the rusted door caught my attention. The forgotten. When I placed my hand on the metal, a fog appeared as if someone inside had exhaled onto the glass. The door wasn't locked, but it felt like it didn't want to open. I pushed, it creaked, and slowly gave way. The air inside carried the scent of rotting medicine, mold, and time. I turned on my flashlight and stepped inside. The rotten tiles on the floor cracked and crunched beneath my feet. Everything didn't look like it had been untouched for years. It looked like it had just been abandoned. And in that moment, I thought I heard, from far, far away, the sound of a chair being dragged. I had the building's blueprints in hand, but the inside didn't match them. The walls looked as if they had shifted over time. The corridors were longer and darker than they should have been. My steps led me, by chance, to a door that wasn't marked on the plans. There was a red symbol on it, tainted with rust, a sign I didn't recognize. When I pushed the door open, what lay beyond resembled less a hospital room and more a ritual chamber. Strange symbols, nearly dried, were drawn on the floor. Ancient Latin writings covered the walls. From the ceiling hung empty restraints, suspended by thick ropes. As I entered, my flashlight flickered. I remembered the batteries were brand new. In that moment, I realized that whatever once happened here went far beyond medicine. This wasn't a place of healing, it was a place of ritual. And something felt like it was still going on. After leaving the ritual room, I continued walking down the corridor. On the left, a locked iron door caught my attention. Behind it was a small cell, just a bed, a chair, and a broken mirror. I leaned in with curiosity, and something in the mirror caught my eye. When I shone my flashlight on the glass, a second face appeared beside my own reflection. It had no eyes, just pitch-black voids. Instinctively, my hand went to my weapon, but the door was locked. The eyes vanished. My reflection stood alone. As I peered deeper into the cell, I noticed a sentence written on the floor. I'm still here. Goosebumps ran down my spine. I had read that sentence before in one of the old patient files. A man who vanished in 1964 and was never found again. Edgar M. Lane. The archive room, it had the sturdiest door in the entire building. I forced open a heavy padlock to get inside. Hundreds of files were meticulously arranged on the shelves, but each was covered in a thick layer of dust. While sweeping my flashlight across the room, a fallen folder on the floor caught my attention. The name on the file cover read, Lane Edgar M. My hand trembled as I picked it up, and I realized it had been opened before. The documents inside were messy, incomplete, but a note had been tucked in. You can't silence him. He will speak.
You can't silence him. He will speak.
The handwriting was shaky and erratic, and on the back page, an EEG chart. The final entry showed brain activity continuing 47 minutes after the heart had stopped. This was something medical science couldn't explain. Maybe the soul was still inside. As I slipped the file into my pocket and stepped out of the room, a sound echoed from deep within the hospital. It started as a whisper, then turned into a moan, and finally a scream. Filled with agony, the sound passed through me, sinking into my very bones. I turned around, but no one was there, only silence, and that familiar muffled hum. Something was following my footsteps, but I couldn't see it. The old fluorescent lights on the ceiling began to flicker, then die. With every blackout, the darkness crept closer. My flashlight trembled in my hand. When the beam returned, strange symbols had appeared on the walls, as if written in invisible ink that had just been revealed. They belonged neither to Latin nor to any language I recognized, and all of them pointed in one direction, the cellar door. When I reached the door, it was bound by a heavy chain, but the chain was rusted, nearly rotted through. It felt less like it had been used to keep something out and more like it had been locking something in. I removed the chain. As the door creaked open slowly, a wave of hot, damp air hit my face. This cellar was far from a standard medical storage room. On the shelves were unmarked glass jars, outdated medical instruments, and mummified rats. Figures drawn on the walls seemed to tell a story, the slow unraveling of a man's mind, followed by a pact with darkness and a transformation. At the very center, embedded in the earth floor, was a stone coffin. The inscriptions on it had been worn away with time, except for one word, still carved deep into the surface: awakening. I carefully shone my flashlight into the coffin. I expected to see a rotting corpse, maybe an old skeleton, but what I encountered was not bone. Inside lay something wrapped in black fabric, covered with ritual shrouds. The cloth bore embroidered symbols, the same ones I had seen on the walls before. With trembling hands, I pulled the covering aside. What lay beneath was not a body. It was a heart-like mass, pulsing like a living artery, surrounded by bony structures that resembled interlocked fingers. But its beat was not like that of a human heart. With every pulse, the air around it rippled, and the old medical instruments trembled. As I leaned closer, a ringing began inside my head. Whispers. It felt as if multiple voices were speaking at once, yet each one was addressing only me. turn back or awaken us.
Turn back or awaking us.
Waking us.
At that moment, my mind began to crack. The room started spinning, the walls closing in on me. It felt as if time wasn't moving forward, but backward. I wasn't in the cellar anymore. I was suddenly in the hospital's past. But this was no mere vision. I was there. The year was 1952. Nurses passed through the corridors and patients stared at me with trembling hands. Among them, I was a stranger, yet at the same time, I was one of them, a doctor or a patient. My reality split in two. I became both the observer and the participant. And then a voice rang in my ear. Remember, you were here, V.O.
Remember, you are here, V.O.
Hearing my own name all at once began to unravel the threads of the past. I was slowly recalling why I was here and who I was. But these memories didn't belong to me. It was as if I were stealing someone else's life. As I tried to pull myself together, I was pulled, like a rippling sound, into a mirrored room deep within the hospital. The room was completely empty, except for a cracked mirror hanging on the wall, its frame rusted and broken in places. What I saw reflected was not what I expected. I didn't see myself. Instead, there stood a silhouette dressed in a patient's robe, headless, with eyes as dark as coal. It didn't move, but it mimicked me every time I did. As I stepped closer, the image blurred, and then suddenly the mirror cracked. From the split, a thick, dark red liquid began to seep. A voice inside me whispered that it wasn't blood. It was heavier, more alive. And I appeared behind the mirror, huge, naked, all-seeing. When it blinked, a single word echoed through my mind like the strike of a hammer. Stranger!
Stranger.
I found myself at the door of an old recording room, wanting to flee backward through time. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, shelves overflowed with audio reels, old spool tape recorders lined the walls, and one recording played on loop across the desk. Amid a hiss of static, a nurse's panicked voice came through.
Climbed the walls all
Patient
night long,
14
had no eyes.
climbed the walls all
Yet saw
night long, had no eyes, yet saw everything. The sentence cut off abruptly. The silence that followed swallowed even the sound of my heartbeat. Yet the tape was still playing. Out of the quiet, a sharp female scream suddenly tore through the air. Another scream, then another, each one closer than the last. Finally, I heard my own voice cry out, "Who am I?" As the tape abruptly ended, every light in the room shut off at once. From within the darkness, the reels began to spin again, but now it wasn't just the tapes recording. The walls were listening too, whispering, and all of them were speaking my name. I started running down the corridor, trying to escape those dark voices. As I turned randomly through the halls, I came across a word scrawled in red paint on a door, nearly faded, restricted. The door was rusted, but I felt something behind it, calling out to me. My hands, slick with sweat, reached for the handle. When I opened it, what lay beyond was not what I expected. It was a children's ward, its walls painted in pale blue. Each bed had a name tag and dusty toys resting on them. Drawings of children decorated the walls, but some weren't drawn. They were scratched out, like they'd been carved away with a blade. At the far end, bolted to the wall, stood an old hospital bed. Its name tag still remained, VO number 14. At the foot of the bed sat a worn teddy bear, its right eye replaced by a rusted nail driven deep into its head. A feeling welled up inside me, unexplainable, yet certain. I belonged here. I don't know why, but in that moment, somewhere deep within, a child began to cry. After leaving the child's room, I found another door hiding a room filled with patient records, an archive of forgotten lives. Most of the files had decayed or been blacked out, but one had been carefully hidden away. Written across its cover in red ink were the words, Subject 14, V-Go. My hands trembling, I opened the file. Inside, there were only a few pages. The first page read, Voluntary Memory Erasure Trial, Psychotraumatic Mind Reprogramming Protocol, conducted by Dr. Henry Ashcroft. The second page was completely scratched out, as if someone had tried to erase what was written beneath. The final page was handwritten. If everything goes as planned, he will remember nothing. But if triggered, that door will never close again. I don't know which he opened that door, but now it's too late. Because at that moment, I remembered everything. I was born inside the Ashcroft Asylum. After leaving the archive room, I turned right and followed the crude arrows drawn on the floor. At the end of the corridor, I came upon a heavy iron gate. A flickering light from inside caught my attention. The door was slightly ajar. As I stepped in, I found myself in a narrow, elongated room lit only by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Along the walls stood rows of mirrors, each one shattered, cracked, some nearly reduced to dust. Every time I approached a mirror, a different face stared back at me from within. A child, then a young man, then a screaming figure I didn't recognize. But in the final mirror, there was no face at all, only a creature with burned out eyes and stitched lips. And in that moment, a hand reached out from the glass and touched me. Yet, in the broken reflection, I still saw my own hand, only mine, but a different version of me. Behind the cracked mirrors, I noticed a small hatch. When I reached out and pushed it, the metal screeched through the silence. Crawling through, I entered a narrow passage just wide enough for my body. The air smelled of mold. The walls were carved with fingernail marks, and broken glass crunched beneath my feet. At the end, I came upon a locked iron door. It read, Shelter 3B, access authorized, founder only. There was no lock, yet something inside had barred it shut. Still, it gave way. When I stepped inside, I froze. This was a laboratory. Intravenous bottles hung from the ceiling like lifeless fruit. Worn notebooks lay scattered across the tables. Flickering X-ray lights cast ghostly shadows on the walls. At the center stood an examination table, and beside it, an old camera dated 1987. In one corner, a television screen pulsed with light, its message flickering in jagged letters. Recording started. VO, subject number 14. Suddenly, a groan echoed from within the ceiling, and the lights died. In that darkness, I knew one thing for certain. Someone or something was still here. I found notebooks on the rusted shelves in the corner of the lab. As I flipped through their pages, each one painted a more disturbing picture than the last. On a page titled Subject Number 14, Observation Notes, my name wasn't written, but every symptom described was mine. Sleepwalking, hallucinations, face blindness. Along the edges of the pages were figures that resembled children's drawings. People with holes where their heads should be, black fluid dripping from their hands, children with no eyes. I had seen all of them before, somewhere. One drawing held a symbol I once drew as a child, a two-ringed eye figure. Were my memories being altered, or had I drawn these myself? The final page ended in shaky handwriting. Subject number 14 wants to forget everything. But the more he forgets, the more it returns. The moment I read those words, the notebook slipped from my hands, and the red light on the wall-mounted camera flickered on. When I cracked open the steel door at the back of the lab, a narrow passage greeted me, curving slowly downward like a spiral. All along the walls were drawn the same repeating symbols, all of them mine. As I moved deeper into the tunnel, gravity itself seemed to shift. My head swam, my steps grew heavier. At the end of the passage, I found a massive mirror bolted to the floor. But this mirror was different from the others. It didn't show my face. It showed what I had buried inside. In the reflection, I was there, but my eyes were hollow, my mouth sealed shut. Black smoke curled from my skull, weaving through the glass like living mist. And once again, I heard those muffled whispers from childhood rising within me. Written across the surface of the mirror in fingerprints was a single word: transformation. The moment I touched the glass, the reflection moved, but I hadn't. My reflection took a step toward me. The footsteps from beyond the mirror shattered the corridor's silence. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't move, as if roots had grown from my soles into the stone beneath. My reflection stepped forward, emerging from the glass, standing face to face with me. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't tear my eyes away. Then a second voice echoed from inside the mirror, memories I had buried in fear as a child. The night I was forced to stay at Ashcroft, the moment my family left me behind and never came back. Scenes I had never remembered suddenly poured into my mind. Rooms filled with sterile light, bottles of medicine, screams in the halls, fingernail marks carved into the walls. I had been silenced then, and now I understood. I truly was a subject. The deepest tombstones of my memory had been carved and hidden behind this very mirror. My reflection raised its hands and whispered through its lipless mouth. Single word, silent yet thunderous. Remember.
Remember.
The memories came like a broken dam flooding my mind. I could hear screams, not from outside, but from within. My own inner voice was shattered into pieces. The walls of the lab, the tunnels, the mirrors, they all began to darken. As the asylum collapsed in on itself, the scream I had buried inside me deafened my ears. But here was the strangeness. I heard no sound at all. All these screams were silent, muffled, echoless. One does not need a voice to go mad in silence. Only a memory, only a glance, only a word. And that word sliced through my mind like a blade. You! This entire torment, this cycle, this void, it had all begun with me. Perhaps I was never just a subject. Maybe I was the architect of this rotting structure itself. At the end of the tunnel, a door appeared. It was no different from the others, just a rusted slab of metal. Yet it stood there, as if waiting for me. I dragged my feet forward. With every step, the echoes beneath my soles beat out of sync with my heart. There was a nameplate on the door, faded, but beneath it, a single word had been carved deep. V.O. Something inside me stopped. I raised my hand and touched the cold metal. A vibration ran through me, and in that instant, the asylum vanished. The mirrors, the ghosts, the screams, the walls, all of it dissolved. I found myself in an interrogation room. Before me, monitors, microphones, and one line scrolling across the screen. Subject 37A, consciousness experiment. Subject reality simulation continues. As my eyes slowly closed, only one thought remained. What if all these files, events, investigations were only ever fragments of my own consciousness? What if I never left at all?